Yeah, so yes, good morning and welcome to the second day of our being together in sharing the Dharma. Yes, so we are in the middle of discussing one of the two instructions of developing bodhicitta. And this first one is called the 7-step cause and effect instruction, where we may want to remember the significance of calling these steps, some of them as cause and some of them as effects, in relation to great compassion at the 5th level. In that, the great compassion, by working on the causes preceding it, and when we hit the stage of great compassion, not just compassion, but great compassion, compassion that has the strength and the intensity to not only merely settle into wishing others to be freed from suffering, but kind of feeling inspired and kind of moved to do something, to want to do something oneself. And that leads to the great extraordinary result, or the great result, in that one then takes the responsibility, shoulders the responsibility upon oneself in doing so. And then the next natural question will be, to do what? What would it take to then make this realization happen, make this wish realized? And from among so many of the possible options, then one kind of eventually lands on becoming fully realized, realizing the full potential of one's positivity. So again, just as we talked about the first step, seeing all sentient beings as having been our mother, as difficult one to first accept and kind of buy into it, because of the fact that it is predicated on the concept of life after life before. Likewise, one may have made this extraordinary resolve to take the responsibility upon oneself, and through thorough reflection, contemplation, and looking into so many of the possibilities, one eventually lands on becoming fully awakened, in the sense that drawing some clues from what one is capable of making improvement, and particularly in the direction of making one's positive qualities stronger and stronger, by making effort, constant effort, trying several avenues in kind of facilitate that. And in the meantime, also see how under the weight of that development, the counterpart negativities kind of minimize, as well as one also takes deliberate attempts in kind of tackling the negativities, and see, no matter in however small amounts it may be, provided one makes effort to those, and one sees over time some changes happening. So from that, one begins to make a sense of maybe there's a way to kind of bring the full potential to blossom. And based on that, along with along with one's own efforts, as well as using insights into how things work, more or less kind of dealing with the physics of mind, how a mental condition is no exception to when it comes to making change happen through special efforts. And from that, kind of come to grips with the fact that maybe it is possible to actually realize such a state of being. In this regard, one thing very important is to look into our mind, and try to get to know it better. In that mind too is amenable to change. And in this regard, in the Buddhist scriptures, we point out two main things. One is, like every other training, mind training also yields to efforts. And with efforts in the positive direction, it does show signs of improvement. And in efforts, either deliberately or out of out of being careless, out of being totally irresponsible, one lets one's mind down, then yes, the downward spiral can also happen over time. There's no guarantee that the older we become, the more peaceful, the more loving we become. There's no guarantee in that. So it's just a matter of where one's attention might have been. And this is the same case with other physical trainings also. In the case of physical training, say take the case of a jumper, right, an athlete. There's some limit. There's some limit. There's a limit how far they can go. Do you think so? Unless you take resort to some heavy-duty technology. I've seen some movies where you may be very infirm, whatnot. Once you get into that technology and kind of spread your arms, then you're not able to do all of those things. But that's not your ability. That's the technology, right? Even the technology would have its own limit as well. So physical things, no matter what, has some limit of how far it can go. All right, and we don't see huge leap forward in the world records. It may be fraction now, right? When the competitors are very good, now the difference may be a fraction of what do you call? A fraction of the fraction of an inch of and in terms of running fast or whatnot, it could be a fraction of the time or whatnot, and even. Yeah, we are getting better in kind of measuring them, but the difference seems to come smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. With the mind also, yes, it is also subject to change, subject to environment, what it is exposed to in a repeated sense, what it is kind of led into without any restraint. That's what it will pick up. And if that's what we don't want, and the wonderful thing is that we can make the mind take a detour, saying, no, this road, I don't want you to go. Although it will be a little difficult in the initial mind. So, no, I want to. That's where you let me into. I'm just used to going there. I just will go. But if you are insistent, very firm and insistent in saying, no, eventually mind would have no choice but to relent. Okay, if that's what you really insist not going, then I will not. But it will not be that easy. So, with efforts, it can change. But in the case of mind, although we would have to still go back to the previous first question of whether there is such thing as life before and life after, which would be predicated on the premise that yes, this gross mind, this gross body, that the mind within us is reducible to this gross body, to this brain, to the brain neurons, whatnot. And once the brains and the body is dead, the mind too is gone, right? So we have to tackle that, and I'll touch on that a little bit. We'll go back and forth. But first we'll tackle this, the possibility, given the condition of the mind, the possibility of hitting that high point, hitting that high point. In the scriptures, it says that yes, the mind too is amenable to change, and that is very clear. Except it will be a little difficult to see the change that easily because of its being so spoiled a child by having completely neglected it, or having kind of really followed it, like saying, "Okay, I come where you go." So, like it's almost like you have become the child of your mind, not the mind your mind, right? So, in the scriptures, it gives this vivid picture of saying, so far, what has been our condition is we always go in a parade, right, with the mind leading us. And what is leading the mind? Afflictions, anger, jealousy, greed, right? Ignorance. They lead the mind, and mind follows it, and we kind of foolishly follow it. Right? That has been the way, and that doesn't necessarily lead to good results. So if we want to change, we want to be upfront and be the lead, saying, let the mind follow us. And in terms of afflictions, see if you want to really have them be part of the parade at all or not. Like that. See if you want them to have any say. Of course, it will be not that easy again to kind of completely shut them off, because they have been speaking. They have been having the speaking role. We have been giving them the lead role, so they are used to that, and we are ourselves used to that. And but if we want to change, then we want to be in the driver's seat. We want to be in the driver's seat, not the wild mind. If the mind becomes totally tamed, whatnot, then yes, we can rest assured, like that of an electric car. We can just let it drive of its own. We can just rest and do everything. No problems would be there. The mind is totally in sync with us, right? Until then, no, we want to be in the driver's seat. So that's the condition, that's the situation of ours, and we want to change it. In that case, we want to have more say in how we think, how we feel, how we relate to things, etc. So in the case of the mind, so that is called training in the transformative form, training in the positive form. Otherwise, if we do not take responsibility or even kind of indulge into the negativities, that is some kind of training, but not the training that we want. In a way, the mind has been trained so much in that direction. Maybe it has changed now. When we were born and we were school children, we may be already holding some degrees, some masters, some PhD in anger, jealousy, greed, ignorance, whatnot, carelessness. So the question is, where does that come from? How come even the two identical children are that different? How are we going to make that case? How are we going to make a case for that? Because this is a big deal. They affect their whole life. They affect what they go through. It's not just some, trivial thing that's happening that could be just brushed off. That kind of determines the quality of life, right? Who the person, what kind of a person you are, how you affect the society, how you relate to others, and that course and how you mess up with the situation. So, from a scripture point of view, yes, we want to. By the way, meditation in very strict Tibetan context, Tibetan Buddhist context, meditation is not just about training the mind in whatever way you like. Meditation specifically is training the mind in the positive direction. That is mind. Of course, when we look at training the mind in terms of stealing the mind, in kind of making it stay on a positive effect on any particular object, be that as neutral as the breath, all you are training is just making the mind kind of sit still and be one-pointed with clarity, focus, enthusiasm, all combined together. In the face of it, it doesn't look like anything positive with it. But the intention behind that, in a strict meditation, is kind of laying the ground for positive cultivations to be built on it. One has this huge project of building skyscrapers of love, compassion, bodhicitta, understanding, whatnot. But one cannot neglect doing the groundwork in leveling it, getting rid of the land of unwanted marsh, unwanted bumps, unwanted rocks, and whatnot. So that's what is being done. So from the get-go, from the get-go of meditation, let's be clear about what it is meant for. Of course, everyone does meditation for good, for one's own good, and in a way that is implied there, but not every time it is clear. So sometimes people use it, not necessarily something that guarantees good, but something that is, that is only, that's a mundane achievement, mundane worldly achievement, worldly prosperity. Like, meditate so that we could produce more. Productivity, right? Not necessarily into love, compassion, understanding, caring, tolerance, right? Meditation, they even speak of, they call these kind of skills, they have a name in the corporate world, in the world, they call this soft skill. Soft skill, right? Soft skill of how to deal, having the paraphernalia, having the sophistication of how to deal with your customers, right? But the end outcome is aimed at productivity. If you say the productivity for what? For something good, then that's fine. If the buck stops there, right? If the buck stops there with just the productivity, with just the fame, with just the wealth, with just the power, but not, then that's awful. I'm seeing it to be everything, like that's capable of producing everything that one wants, then that's problematic. So yeah, from the strict Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist, and I think that's the same case with every spirituality, every spiritual tradition. It's aimed at good, not at all in making us even worse. So the case it makes for such a possibility is that mind, like everything else, is also amenable to change. But one thing special about the mind is that after certain efforts, then the training will kind of build up to a stage where what one has trained in becomes spontaneous. Where, in the case of a runner, in the case of an athlete, every time they have to run, no matter how good they may be, a world record holder or whatnot, they can't just jump from where they are. Whoa, they can't do that. They have to do, what do you call that? Run start, right? Running start. Yeah, they have to do the running start. Every time they jump, they have to do the running start. every time. With any kind of expertise, they can jump. At one point, they can jump from wherever they are standing. Whoa, they can't do that. In the case of the mind, of course, in the initial time, like in the case of bodhicitta, love, compassion, and whatnot, when you train in it, yes, you still have to do something like that of the running start. That's when your training is at the contrived level. Every method, you kind of go from the first stage, come down into those, eventually kind of mold the mind into a bodhicitta form, hold it there, almost like impress it on your mind. And then as the force of it fades away, again come from the first, and then kind of build the momentum, molding the mind, kind of see the mind kind of molding into it, and then hold it. That's how you, that's how one trains, right? And that's the contrived level of training before it has hit that point of now becoming spontaneous. And now, at that point, you don't have to go through the whole series. In some cases, a mere intention to generate it would be enough to just come in it. And then that too, when you train again and again and again, and familiarize again and again, gains momentum, gains strength, and to even greater level. And that's true. That's true with insights. That's true with the method aspect of cultivation, like love, compassion, emotional components of training, positive training, as well as cognitive components of training. In the case of Kampo, cognitive components of training, like understanding or developing an insight into something, eventually, first it will be conceptual. It will be conceptual, it will be mediated, it will be conceptual. In the Buddhist psychology, we speak of, right now, the modern psychology doesn't speak of that. And maybe because we don't have many, we don't have many subjects for experiment. So we, test subjects. So His Holiness has been calling on the Buddhist practitioners, saying we need to have some actual meditators who have achieved this. You can't just merely say this is what is taught in the scripture, this is possible, whatnot. That's almost equal to window shopping. We even have an expression. You want to hit someone, but the fist is always hidden under your robe and doesn't get far. Right? You think like you have a fist to hit someone and challenge someone, but it is under the sand, under the robe, and it can't actually do it. So likewise, he said, "Oh, the scripture says this is possible. This is who has it? No." So that's the problem. Partly, we are to blame. The practitioners are to blame. Science will be as open if we have this kind of a test. What was the test subject? Test subject. Yeah, if we have test subjects, science would not shy away from looking into it. Right? So the reason why modern psychology doesn't speak of training the mind, cognitive state of mind from conceptual to eventually non-conceptual, is just because there's no one who shows that, right? And usually it only confines its experiments to the general public. In a way, it is understandable because there is more market there. But at the same time, if we can come up with actual, but the tricky thing is that sometimes the genuine practitioners, they don't want to be guinea pigs. They don't want to be guinea pigs. Guinea pigs. Yeah, they don't want to be guinea pigs. And they don't want to be disturbed. Sometimes they worry that maybe that can corrupt their intention, the integrity of their practice. something about worldliness, something about making name, something about being maybe not intentionally, but kind of getting sidetracked, worries them. There were some who were quite reluctant to come forward to be tested, even at the bidding of His Holiness. And His Holiness, when this was brought to His Holiness says, of course, that's genuine concern.
What did he say?
It's a genuine concern. It's a genuine concern. It's a valid concern to have. So from the Buddhist perspective, again in the scriptures, not in here, it says that the cognitive cultivations, right? Just as love, compassion can be trained to such a level, when there will be no need of any running start to do, right? It will be just there, and it will permeate your whole being in such a way that would be like your new normal personality. That would say, in the case of bodhicitta, now that would have replaced your self-centeredness, right? Instead of thinking, what do I get from this? I say, how does this benefit others? That would be their first and foremost reaction, right? And so just as love and compassion can be trained to that point, likewise, cognitive components of spiritual awakening, because to a great extent, spiritual awakening has to be complemented by insight into the reality, deeper and deeper understanding of how the reality works. The more close we are to the reality in how things work, the more close we'll be in really kind of making things actual happen. And also our own habits, etc., that are informed by these insights will be in sync with the reality, and thus the ease, no friction, no conflict. Very often, many of the problems that we feel is because the reality is going somewhere and we want it to go somewhere. That's where we are suffering. And we still insist on wishing that happen, right? Be that with our own impermanence, etc., etc. So many things. So in the case of cognitive components of the spiritual cultivations, the progression happens in the way of first starting out. We speak of, say in the case of cultivating and understanding into the impermanent nature of things, or in the subtle interdependent nature of things, first we have to deal with the apparent obstacles in the form of a completely misconstrued understanding, misconstrued position about that. And then once we overcome that, then through our own study, learning, hearing, we kind of build some understanding at the language level, at the verbal level, at the language level. Then contemplate on that to make it into some kind of a insight, some kind of a conviction in one's mind. That would be the aha moment. Yeah, okay, so that's what it means. There will be a connection between what you understood at the linguistic level to actually seeing it. But still, that's not the whole story. Then, at that time, the understanding would be a conceptual. The intellect would have kind of made sense of it. Now it takes deeper work to kind of bring that understanding down to the core feeling level, to the core being level, so that it could then permeate one's whole being, and that becomes more and more and more natural, more and more what do you call an immediate response kind of a thing. Even then, it would still, for a long time, it would still be conceptual, right? The conceptual process is quite long, right? And then eventually it will slide into a perceptual awakening. Right now, we don't have so much of a perceptual thing that is mental. All we have by way of perceptual thing is sensory. We will say the eye sees something, that would be not conceptual, that would be perceptual. But would only be limited to sensory level of understanding that is perceptual, not so much mental that is perceptual. All we have by way of mental is just about everything: bodhicitta, compassion, understanding, emptiness, whatever, all conceptual. That's not strong enough to really strike hard at their own corresponding counterparts. They still have long way to go to build their muscle, to really now strike at their own respective counterparts. And that, particularly in the case of this understanding, right, the cognitive cultivation of the insight into reality, it's not until they have kind of slid into they have slided into the non-conceptual level. That until then they cannot. They can undermine. They can what do you call? I don't know what the term would be, since we don't have any clear-cut demarcation of grades of terms to use that to reflect that process. But it will not be able to render any level of its counterpart misunderstanding to complete irreversibility, to complete no return kind of thing. Not even the grossest level of such a misunderstanding. But that starts when one has brought that conceptual correct understanding to as perceptual level. The initial perceptual level can at least deal with gross level of that misperception, misconception. Because when we talk about misunderstanding and whatnot, we're not just talking about we're not just talking about, if I can use the term, because I'm having an image here, we're not just talking about bubbles of misunderstandings, but rather that when they pop up, that's all there is. But rather, they are rooted, they are kind of so ingrained in our mentality due to having kind of habituated in them, right? So even if due to some conditions, sometimes it may pop up into some kind of a balloon, but merely dealing with the balloon is not enough. There's still some seeds remaining there to ever ready to give rise to those balloons, right? So there's much more work to be done in getting rid of those misunderstandings, and thus the force, the counter force to do that has to be as strong. So even if the understanding is right and it's going in the right direction of really kind of exposing that misunderstanding and kind of challenging it, but until it has reached that non-conceptual, perceptual state of awakening, which would be a state of kind of really rooted into one's. It's no more now here. It is no more just here. It is here, but along with that, it is kind of completely linked with one's being. So to that extent, it has gained that strength to kind of strike against the counterpart negativity, a counterpart misunderstanding. And that too can be then further strengthened to then even gain strength in striking harder and harder, deeper and deeper into the subtle layers of that habituation. It's like peeling off that habituation from the continuum of one's mind, like that. So on the one hand, mind has this capacity to develop immensely. In technical terms, we call that infinitely, right? Infinitely, train infinitely, but not infinitely in the sense that even after having reached the state of Buddhahood, there would still be room to improve. Not in that sense, but infinitely in the sense that we do not come to some kind of a roadblock in the meantime, like we do in the case of physical training. It can go further than into non-conceptual non-conceptual cultivations. So, yes, please.
To the ultimate degree you're talking about, we don't have test subjects, but on a lesser degree, we do have test subjects. In the sense of, but in terms of engineering it backwards, if you think about children who are traumatized and it happens at a pre-conceptual level, it really happens strictly at a perceptual level.
Oh,
It's
okay.
non-linguistic. There's no language to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
As they develop into people that have language, that's where I'll just stray into the field of mental health for a second. That's where the most frightening diagnosis for a clinician to work with, which is called the borderline personality, which they have no capacity to self-soothe. And every bit of input that comes in is misinterpreted.
Oh.
Okay. Well, about 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago now, they began doing both calming meditation with people like this that had developed enough suffering to be a little bit willing to do the work, and also, and then exercises in terms they began to look at their thoughts cognitively and stuff.
I see.
And so, and a capacity to kind of, now it's not at a level of automaticity for most of them, but they were able, I guess what I'm saying is that what they decided is that kind of trauma literally gets hardwired in at a mitochondrial level.
Oh, okay.
But it can be rewired with a practice of learning to soothe, and then the cognitive conceptual work of kind of literally rewriting
Yes,
reality. So in a sense, that's a test subject for the non-perceptual to the conceptual, but kind of moving it backwards.
yes.
And
yes.
what's interesting is that the woman that founded this, although there are many other people that have started doing it, still sits Zen, but sat Zen for 20 years.
Still what?
Sat Zen. It was a very, very committed meditator.
Oh, I see.
The clinician that designed this.
I see.
So I know that probably doesn't make any sense, but there are test subjects in terms of going in the other direction.
Oh, yeah. It does make perfect sense. By the way, in the Buddhist cosmology, in the Buddhist psychology, sorry, I'm in the cosmos. In the cosmos, looking into several world systems, among which our world is just one. So in the Buddhist psychology, we speak of this journey of mental development, starting from perception to conception, conceptual to then perceptual. Yes, please.
Say that again, Geshe.
Yeah, we usually speak of the mental journey, starting with perception, mediated by conception, conceptuality, and kind of culminating into non-conceptual, perceptual level, but not out of automaticity, but not automatically. That we could get stuck in the conceptual unless we make a special effort. Or in some cases, it could go into the perceptual, but not for the good reason. Which means if we really indulge in negativity, it could go so strong that eventually it would have some kind of really hit the bones, right? And things out of that could appear almost like real. Be that attachment, anger. If we indulge in that so much, sometimes we could even have perceptual vision of the person in front of us. Or in some cases, sensory awareness of their being around. So it can go both backwards and forward. Yeah, but here we are talking of meditation, right? We don't want to go backward, right? We've already been there. So, yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah, I have a question about the mental direct perception, the non-conceptual.
Yeah.
Do we, like with every direct sense perception, do we not have a momentary mental direct perception before it develops into a conception, such as you hit your hand with a hammer, you have the tactile, and then the mental direct for an instant before you start cursing, which is the conceptual part of it. So is it not the case that with every direct sense perception that we do have an instant of mental direct, non-conceptual, before it becomes conceptual? And it's just an instant that we need to somehow be able to expand that instant eventually in having a direct realization of emptiness?
Yes, some Buddhist tenets make the case for that. Some Buddhist tenets make the case for that there is a momentary, a moment, a very short moment of mental perception before it leads to the conceptual mind. And also, isn't it that at the end of a stream of sensory consciousness, there will be a moment of mental perceptual consciousness with the same objects, whatnot, and it's right away, immediately sliding into a conceptual. So that's very difficult to prove. That's why I didn't bring up. And even if we accept that, that's not the area where we say we could work on and expand and utilize it. It is more of a automatic, natural thing happening. So that will not be a field that you can work on and expand. Rather, one wants to work separately on any topic it may be, but positive cultivation, be that emotional or cognitive, and then start from the conceptual to eventually perceptual, and kind of get that rooted.
So you're going backwards. You're starting with the inferential realization, and then that becomes the direct non-conceptual, rather than trying to take that moment of of direct mental and expand that somehow.
Yeah, okay. Usually that mental non-perceptual, non-conceptual, perceptual consciousness may be mostly associated with general mundane objects of the senses, not so much of deep insights.
Okay.
And plus it is automatic, a natural automatic. But at the same time, for any kind of a cultivation that entails kind of training from inferential, conceptual to eventually non-conceptual, but it could be traced back. The continuum of that could be traced back to something perceptual. Not necessarily with that, to something perceptual, like a sense consciousness holding on to an object, and that one kind of keeps to then wonder about its nature, deeper nature, using inference to understand it, to eventually then ingrain it into a non-conceptual awakening, like that. Yeah. So yes, that's a wonderful question. So out of the two things that I was sharing about the mental capacity, mental habit from Buddhist psychology, one is that it could be trained. It could be trained and trained infinitely, not hit a limit like in the case of physical objects, in the sense that it doesn't need to do the running start. So the mental trainings may require running starts in the initial, but not necessarily always. And even the running start may not mark its transition into the non-conceptual, but it's leading more and more into that. Now that we have seen that no need of running start, it kind of gives our hopes up that maybe it could even be improved upon. And the claim is for them to become non-conceptual, perceptual. In the case of spiritual training, we call that the path of seeing. It's almost like for the first time one is seeing the things, seeing directly, seeing at the level that really matters. So the path of seeing is so called because that's when you begin to see directly. So another way of calling calling non-conceptual is seeing it directly, seeing impermanence, seeing the emptiness directly, unmediated by the conceptual appearances. So almost like you're seeing it for the first time at a level that really matters. In that's when one would begin to, although scrap of the surface of that corresponding misunderstanding or corresponding or negative emotion, but for good. At least for good. Whatever you scrap off, you now are not going to let it come back. So that marks the first taste of actual cessation. And to that extent, one is now protected for good. So that's why that level of cessation is called the first taste of the cessation component of Dharma. That's the reason why Dharma is called the real refuge, be that in the form of the path, the true seeing path, which is the first taste of path component of the Dharma, and then the cessation that it entails before long is the first taste of the cessation component of the Dharma. And to that extent, one would have been protected from whatever negativities that might otherwise entail from its being around. So that's one, the possibility of training it without the need of running start. Let's call that, right? A possibility of changing through training, of course, with everything like everything, but unlike physical things. In the scriptures, it uses the example of water. If you heat the water, you can heat it to the boiling point, and you keep on heating. Eventually, the water itself will have gone, will have evaporated. Right? That's not the case with the mind. The more you train, right? That's not the case with the mind. In that, the more you train, the lesser it becomes mind-like, and eventually become no mind at all. So mind doesn't get exhausted in its nature by training. And on top of that, it kind of picks up that momentum to a point of no more needing the running start. That's one thing about training. Now the other thing is the obstacles that we are dealing with. The obstacles that we are dealing with, be that hatred, anger, jealousy, greed, or misunderstanding, or what you call projecting permanence, projecting things having intrinsic existence, the opposites of these insights that we speak of. They are fundamentally, essentially incongruent with the reality. So they are based on a misunderstanding. They are rooted in a wrong assessment. And because of its being rooted in wrong assessment, it is not in sync with the reality. It leaves the room for it to be exposed. all it takes is special effort in doing it. It's on the basis of that, what do you call, on the basis of that, on the basis of that congruity. Yeah, on the basis of that incongruity that we can speak, that provided we make effort, they can be made lesser and lesser and lesser and eventually completely gone. Because we can put up a very strong, powerful antidote against them, while they do not have their own base in reality. And in this respect, in the case of the afflictions, anger, jealousy, whatnot, deep down the misperception amounting to projecting inherent existence underlies it. That's the reason why understanding emptiness is a big deal. It's like, if you get the understanding of emptiness right, it's like really shaking the, what do you call it, the, pardon?
The foundation.
Yeah, pardon? Yeah, the core or the rug. The rug. It's just like pulling the rug. Whereas if we don't deal with that, and we deal with some other understandings, it's like dealing with one problem individually, not pulling the rug. If we pull the rug, everything gets shaken like, whoa, what's happening now? So those are the rationales behind this possibility. But we still have this other problem of whether there is a continuity across lives. In this regard, after I saw the interest yesterday, I pulled up some materials that I have it on my computer. And by the way, this computer has really stood strong. Years after years, I have never had even a single glitch. You have seen this, right? And I had this before that. My niece bought one, maybe around the same time I had this. I paid for that. She was very, very happy. She wanted to be social media. I said, what are you going to do that? Okay, but still, let her first have the taste of what it is like, and so that she could make her own decision, right? But then hers is all long gone. And when now I visit India and I kind of work on it, Uncle, isn't this the one you had a long time ago? I said, yes. How come it's still going strong? Pardon? Not so much. In this not so successful. See, I have this.
Virtuous.
Pardon?
Virtuous.
No, nothing magical about it. I'm doing a practical work of caring about it and paying for regular maintenance. Because if you don't pay, who knows, the companies may send some virus. And I'm paying, I'm just joking. So I'm paying this automatic payment every year. I once thought I will stop it, because when I revealed it to some friends, I said, this is useless, you don't need to do that. It amounts to some $100 or $90 a year. Or maybe 65 something, 65 something. And it now comes to almost 10 years, right? So 600 something. But it is definitely worth it. Not to have that headache and having to do everything anew, right? So I do that. I pay that every year automatically. So that seems to really take care. And it even tells me, it even kind of asserts some kind of a say in how I work. If I work from office, no, you cannot have this access. Ask Dadul, something. Yeah. And I have to go through me to get access to my computer in certain areas. Okay, so much about my computer. Yeah, I have I'll share something about this, because these are from Western researchers, not from Eastern believers, but not converts themselves. Who knows? So there was this. I think I shared with some of you. There's this radio NPR interview that's called People's Pharmacy that someone did with 3 physicians. One of them is even, all of them are still living. One of them is a molecular biologist, PhD, a solid, hard-nosed scientist even. So I'm not going to read everything, but some. So in response to one of the questions, Dr. Bruce Grayson, MD, who is a Carlson Professor of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at the University of Virginia. I have seen some of their works, and it's just some of the fields they're looking into seems even quite wild, and from a Buddhist perspective also. So I do not mean to buy into all they say, right? So in the course of the dialogue, he says this: "Well, I'm glad to hear that you, the interviewer, are struggling with this, because I do too. I think we need more people to struggle with what these answers really mean about the nature of consciousness. I think what it tells us is that the materialistic model that we are physical animals and that's it is incomplete. What it tells us beyond that, I think, is still an open question. But it does seem to point to that." And it continues, "There are lots of religious models that may explain some of these phenomena, but they are all encumbered by cultural beliefs, and I don't know that we have any way of sorting them out at this point. There's a mess." They touch on these, but with the mess that comes along with it, with so many beliefs and with so many cultural strands, religious strands, whatnot, and it's now a mess. They kind of wonder if it is worth really sorting through it. They want to start anew. But they think that that's something that could be looked into. And he says, "I think these are important questions, and at this point the science that we have has a very hard time dealing with the answers. I think the type of work that Sam Parnia, another one in the interview, who is the molecular biologist, I think, and the rest of us are doing that. I think the type of work that Sam Parnia and the rest of us are doing is slowly pushing the boundaries of science so that we can get closer and closer to the answers. But we are a long way from getting definitive answers yet. I think at this point it is enough for us to be humble and say we don't have all the answers we thought we did, and that the world is much more, I love this, and that the world is much more, can you feel it? Much more bizarre." That's so good. That's so good that you miss it. I got to say it, right? And that the world is much more bizarre than we can even imagine. It indeed is. And it would be even much more bizarre if we were the only one living. That would be bizarre, awkward. What are we doing here? Okay, so that's one. Then Dr. Sam Parnia, he's also interviewed in this. He says he's a PhD in cell biology, an honorary senior research fellow in the School of Medicine of the University of Southampton, UK, and is a fellow in pulmonary and critical care medicine at Weill Cornell Medical Center in New York. Now, there are two pieces to him. He says, many eminent physicists like Lord Kelvin believed that physics had all the answers to all the problems in the universe. What was left were just minor details here and there that hadn't been sorted out. Then new phenomenon was discovered, new observations that came about through physics at the turn of the 20th century that Newtonian physics was no longer able to account for. So quantum physics, quantum mechanics. That was the beginning of ultimately a new branch of physics, quantum physics. And he says, he keeps on saying, now apply that to the state of play with the state of play? I don't know. State of play with the human mind, maybe. Now apply that to the state of play with the human mind and consciousness. Our assumptions that human mind, consciousness, and the brain are the same thing work for the majority of cases. In the same way nowadays, if we use Newtonian physics for most things on planet Earth that we are involved with, that's fine. We don't have to apply quantum laws, right, on those planets, at the planetary level. They work fine. It's only when you go to that extreme of minute, micro level that those laws no longer hold. So he's suggesting. So he says, he continues to say, well, the same thing seems to be true with human mind and consciousness. In the majority of cases, it's fine. But when you go to the extreme cases, for example, when you study consciousness, when people are going through clinical death, when the brain has stopped functioning, you suddenly see that these notions that we have, that mind and brain are the same thing, may no longer hold true. Therefore, it may be that we are on the verge of discovering a whole new science, a science that helps us to understand what the human mind and consciousness is, in the same way that in the 20th century we had to come out with a whole new branch of physics that explained things in those extremes at the subatomic level. I think it may be that if these experiments work, that's what we are heading towards, which we are very, very excited about, of course. Who knows what the potentials will be. And there is a third one. I really love him. He's in the critical care physician, and in the radio, in the way he sounds, oh, it was so appealing, so kind of soothing to hear him. So he's the one who is in the critical care position, like others as well, but more into resuscitation thing. He's a pediatrician who has studied near-death experiences in children. Yes. So here he says, anyone who is having difficulty understanding this, the fact of something going beyond his life, I sympathize with you. It has taken me 20 years to understand it. When I first started to hear these stories from children, I laughed. This one girl told me that after giving a detailed description of her own resuscitation, in which she would say things like, you know, I saw you go over to the phone and you talked to some other doctor and said, what am I supposed to do next? And then, yeah. And then I heard one of the nurses talk about her cat, and that her cat was going to have to go to the hospital. And then everybody took me into another room where there's a machine that looked like a donut, right? A donut, maybe a scan, yeah, MRI, donut. Then she told me that she went to this heavenly realm, when she saw the obvious disbelief, and then she told me when she went to the heavenly realm, and when she saw the obvious disbelief on my face, she reached over and patted my hand, and she goes, you will see, Dr. Morse, heaven is fun. But with Dr. Melvin Morse, yeah, that's his name. But with Dr. Melvin Morse, there's another one that I really love as much. Let me check. Okay, you're going to, you're okay putting up with me going through this? Okay, in that case, then I will. Otherwise, you can say stop. I can stop and then shift gears. Yeah. Again, it's the same, Dr. Melvin Morse. One reason that I have gone into this research full time is that I feel a tremendous obligation to share with people what I know. Because your question is essentially, were these children truly near death? The advantage of being a critical care physician is that yes, these children were by any criteria not just near death, but were dead. These are children who were underwater for 19 minutes, underwater for 45 minutes. They are truly extraordinary resuscitations. We defined as near death only children who truly are at the point of death. Their pupils are fixed, dilated, they are not breathing on their own. I don't have to rely on medical records or the reports from other people. These are children I resuscitated myself or my partners did. Well, actually, not that I have quoted here, but he says in this interview, in his case, the resuscitation, the people who kind of came up with the stories, the resuscitation percentage was 100%. Usually it is 20% among those who have been resuscitated. Those who come up with such stories is considered to be 20%. But in his case, under him, it was 100%. This is interesting. That's one of his subjects. I have to tell you one teenage boy that we worked on to resuscitate. After he was successfully resuscitated, I was talking to him and I made reference to that we had saved his life. He looked at me and he said, "No, you didn't." What do you mean, saving my life? I made my intentional decision to come back. Okay, let me check. No, you didn't, he said. And then he went on to explain what actually happened. Your crash card, right? Crash card wasn't plugged in. He said, yeah, your crash card wasn't plugged in. That is the by which you resuscitate the machine. Yeah, they had to make sure it is plugged in. They hadn't plugged in, and they were hurrying to resuscitate it. It wouldn't work. What is going on? There was a a hustle going on. So he would say, "No, you didn't save my life, and your crash card wasn't plugged in." He said, "When I was floating on the ceiling." When I was floating on the ceiling, I looked down and I saw that it wasn't plugged in at all, and that's why you guys were having trouble getting it to work. And he was absolutely right. We had been having trouble getting it to work, and in the hubbub of resuscitation, and such as that, somebody had kicked the plug free from the wall. So they get all of these little details correct about their own resuscitations. These are Western scientists who have a very strong, long, solid background in science. Many of them having been in the teaching profession as professors for 50 plus years, and eventually, out of their own interest, ventured into experimenting the so-called paranormal. The so-called paranormal. It is all contextual paranormal, and that's what they have found. Yeah, there is this one statement that I was really struck to have come from a scientist in the same department at the University of Virginia. Someone called Dr. Jim Tucker, and he says, there can be something that survives after the death of the brain and the death of the body that is somehow connected to a new child. I have become convinced that there is more to the world than the physical universe. There is the mind piece, which is its own entity. To have come from a scientist who is doing these researches with whatever stake, right? There could be huge at stake in losing credibility at Is he okay? Yeah. So yeah, this is not a completely resolved area. We better give the benefit of the doubt and uh, think of think of buying an insurance. Yeah, before it's too late. And the good thing in this, good thing in this is the insurance doesn't ask for any money. It only asks for individual contribution of spiritual cultivations. And this way of paying for the insurance is good here and now and good there if there is. If not, we wouldn't have lost our insurance money at all because we would be doing the good here and now. This makes perfect sense. I mean, to me, it makes perfect sense. Until the time when this is completely a closed chapter. Then I say, okay, now I don't have to worry about it. But at the same time, I'll be as integrated, as, what do you call, sensible and intelligent in living the life I want to. Right? That should not change. If that should not change, even if this chapter is closed, then if this is an open-ended question, why not pay attention to it?
Cover your bases.
Yeah, cover your. Why not cover your bases? Okay. I go back after the retreats from here with so many words. Okay, so I think we have covered it fairly thoroughly, right? Even including the elephants in the room. Yeah. What was So the 2 points about the mental cultivation, it's so important. The prospect of improvement is because the hurdles are rooted in misunderstanding, and thus it doesn't have legitimate grounding in the reality. We may have just made it strong by having habituated in it. But the moment we try to push against it, it will begin to tilt, eventually crash down, just because it doesn't have its foundation rooted in the reality. That's one thing. Another thing is that the training, mind training, can happen. Pretty amazing, much more amazing than the physical trainings. It doesn't get blocked, limited, stopped at certain limit. And we call that, I like this, because when I say this in Tibetan, it almost sounds very, very funny and good in English. By the way, we tackle these problems in the form of syllogisms. So, 10, 10. Say 10, 10, 10, 10. First 10 and the second 10, you spell differently. 10, 10. 10, 10, komsim bezun kyamal lama tuyo basem jirang shinyi mechir. Because it is in the nature of mind that it has, unlike the physical body, it has a very firm base in the clear light mind. It has a very firm base, unlike physical body. It has a very firm base that the more you train, the more invigorated it becomes, not does it become exhausted and severed. 10, 10. And it has built into its nature a tendency of eventually picking up on the training, so much so that now eventually you don't even need a running start. And then on the other hand, the sufferings can be ended because their root has very strong antidote rooted in reality, whereas their roots are not rooted in reality. Because of that fact, if we make effort, there is a way to make a difference. So on those two bases, we make the case that yes, the aim of bodhicitta is achievable. Yeah, aim of ultimate bodhicitta as well as conventional bodhicitta also, because the aim of conventional bodhicitta is full awakening, and the full awakening is stopped by is hampered by at this point is hampered by obstacles in the form of afflictions, misunderstandings, whatnot, and they are all rooted in misunderstanding. And because of that, it always leaves that room for it to be addressed. And that's how full awakening can happen. Of course, that can happen with the help, to a great extent, with the help of ultimate bodhicitta. But at the same time, what that means is it leads closer and closer to realizing the goal of the conventional bodhicitta. Conventional bodhicitta, the aim is full awakening. The full awakening is possible with the aid of course, conventional bodhicitta as well as ultimate bodhicitta, in that the ultimate bodhicitta strikes at the very heart of the underlying misperception, upon which base all the negativities are built. So, by way of the obstacles, we are speaking of course, the gross, recognizable afflictions like anger, jealousy, and greed, but more deeper in the form of the what we call tendencies or instincts or habituations built in our mental stream. They are, no matter how strong they may be, they are in essence, essentially, fundamentally, their sustenance. Their sustenance is a misperception. Fundamentally, their sustenance on which they survive, they thrive, they function, is a misunderstanding, or rather misknowledge, to the effect of wrongfully projecting inherent existence on things, more primarily to oneself. Okay. Okay, yeah. So now, yes, this is still dealing with the 7-point mind, 7-point cause and effect instruction, in that the 7-point cause and effect instruction leading to cultivation of bodhicitta has to be preceded by first laying the ground, level the ground in the form of equanimity. And equanimity, in the traditional scriptures, we speak in three, not equanimity as such, but the Tibetan term that we are equating it with is tangyom, and it is used in different contexts. So the equanimity that is being required as a predicate, or as a prerequisite for cultivating the 7-point cause and effect instruction, is the third one. The equanimity in the context of cultivating impartiality. So impartiality, more in the sense, impartiality not in the sense of what do you call, deleting the boundaries of distinction, deleting the categories of people in relation to oneself. So we do not necessarily have to do away with that categorization of people outside of us into three: the strangers, the near ones, and the troublesomes. Right? We don't have to delete that. That is, of course, contextual, but still within that context has its root in the reality. What we are trying to achieve by training in the equanimity is our unbalanced way of reacting to them. In the case of the strangers, without any clear pull into either attachment or into aversion or into antipathy. Yeah. Whereas in the case of near ones, whatnot, for whatever reasons, again, that too is not stable, but we tend to take this categorization too seriously, at least within that time frame, and then kind of move into the other extreme, right, with regard to the same person when something changes, whatnot. But we tend to kind of get into those strong forms of reaction. So the equanimity training is at this point, at the bodhisattva level practice, after having generated bodhicitta, whatnot, maybe one of the natural outcome of their cultivation would be not see anyone as enemy. Eventually, they will begin to see anyone as teachers. They indeed are not stopping to teach you. People just don't stop ever teaching you. That's exactly what's happening. Only if we care to look for the teachings. They are good at whatever level they are, whatever kind of relation. We need that diversity to teach us from in an all-rounded way. It's like they are volunteering to teach us. And we just have to be kind of sensitized to that. And we begin to see the lessons. Right? Some of these teachings we don't even get from our teachers, so-called teachers, even Buddhas. Practical teachers, practical teaching. They give, that can go deep down. Yes, please.
So Geshe, let me make sure I understand this, is that this meditation, equanimity, is not about how the mind imputes and puts people into these categories. It's it's the reactivity, the misconceptions, not the categories. This is kind of a new concept here.
I see. Yeah, at this level, we're not struggling to eliminate the categorization. We could keep the categorization intact, because we could do that because they have, as much as contextual they are, but they have root in some reality of what actually happened. So we do not have to struggle in deleting that categorization. What we try to work on is our imbalanced reactivity. Basically taking a lesson from how we already respond to the strangers, right? How we already respond to the strangers with neither strong attachment, neither strong blind attachment, or no strong antipathy, kind of a balanced way of dealing with it. Almost able to listen to them quite objectively, but not so much with the two categories. So observing that and kind of seeing through that, kind of exposing that, seeing through that, in saying that doesn't make sense. It's neither good for me nor for them, nor are they worthy of this kind of a mistreatment or this kind of an imbalanced treatment, given the bigger picture of what we happen around. See, with the strangers, how we relate, we could as well do the same thing, because these have the potential to go into any of those categories. Do we want to then switch, make a big fuss about this? And these same person, same categories that we have this kind of extreme way of relating, they could also switch any time. And in terms of having benefited, if we borrow from the concept of rebirth and whatnot, not a single one can be singled out in having been our mother, in having been our teachers, brothers, sisters, whatnot. So everyone has so dearly, at the cost of their even life, cared for us. How come this big deal about the petty things that they have done? Even those could have been turned around for your own good, except if you had that sensitivity. Come on, you could heal like this. Come on, what are you doing? And then, if you give into those extreme reactions, it doesn't lead necessarily to good things. Mostly, they lead into problems. right? In what do you call incongruities, in unintelligent responses, unintelligent, unsmart. Unskillful, foolish decisions, and that you pursue further and further. We kind of go further and further away from the reality. We start from a wrong point, and every step on that basis is like we want to go there. If we face like this, and every step is taking us further and further and further. Like is the case with once we give in to these extreme feelings and then follow their dictates, that kind of takes us further and further away the reality. And then on the top of that, this categorization is not that fixed. It could change anytime. If one were to kind of really give into that, that's like what do you call putting oneself at the mercy of what others do, right? Completely losing control of oneself. It's like giving the car key. It's like giving the car key to a rude, reckless driver and say, "Come on, drive this car for me." How would you rest assured in the back seat? You wouldn't have, even if it goes for the days together, you might not sleep. So yeah, equanimity here is more on working on those extreme reactive way, and more kind of centering to a state of how one naturally responds to a neutral person, and then stabilizing that through special result, not kind of mimic that kind of a reaction to a stranger, kind of take ownership of that, right, and then kind of strengthen it, kind of stabilize it with further reasoning, further understanding, and then base the following the cultivation, beginning with seeing others having been your mother, etc. Okay. Yeah, so the need for equanimity. In its absence, our compassion will be partial and based. It's not that without equanimity we will not be compassionate. We will be, but very selectively. Very selectively. We are all capable of being compassionate, but not for everyone, right? Not for everyone. So it will be very selective, and it will be very biased. Because our tendency to be compassionate will be only to those whom we have this close feeling, for whatever reasons, whatever temporary reasons, right? Narrow reasons, and instead would have hard time generating same kind of affection to as much deserving people, but except they don't happen to be in that category. Then we will not be able to generate compassion towards them. So that's how, in the absence of equanimity, our compassion will be partial and biased. It's almost like saying, in the absence of having done the groundwork of leveling the ground, the skyscraper will be already tilted. Yes, please.
I think I already have the predisposed tendency to treat neutral people indifferent, which is
I see.
not. I don't think what you're saying.
Yes.
More about having
Yes.
this stable compassion
Yes.
rather than this blatant indifference.
Yes. So stabilizing in the sense of not building on the indifference aspect of it, but building more on its what you call middle ground aspect of it, and then build on that, right? Build on that, and then with that, then you build love and compassion. So of course, not stay at the indifferent level. No kind of what do you call no kind of what do you call develop that or celebrate the indifferent part of it, but kind of focus more on its aspect of not giving into any of those extreme forces. Yes, please.
So is what we're building on more the fact that with the neutral people, I'm more willing to take them as they are
Mm-hmm.
rather than dealing with pre-existing biases.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the dangers. And then the usual immediate reaction is kind of blindly taking, blindly buying, blindly kind of associating with them, blindly kind of, even if we call that compassion, but even that is not that pure compassion. It is kind of already, what do you call? Contaminated, tainted. Yeah, tainted, and that kind of has the tendency of taking into all places wrong. So that happens both with the near and dear ones, as well as with the difficult ones. Okay. Yeah, and it's in its absence, our compassion won't be stable. Yes, we will be switching. We'll be switching from being compassionate to this, to this, and to this, and this kind of always kind of juggling. Pardon? Yeah, always being fickle, and not being able to kind of cultivate love and compassion towards everyone. So, in a way, kind of putting ourselves subject to that bumpy ride. Subject to that bumpy ride, right? Except it will be different places at different times. I guess it's already time. Yeah. Yes. Oh, Dr. Melvin Morse. Morse. Yeah, Melvin. Welcome. Okay.